Two things to note before I actually get started with this video. First off, this video is only based on my personal experiences of working a couple of different jobs in the United States. So if you live somewhere else, or you've worked any other place that I don't personally have experience in, this may or may not help you. So just keep that in mind. Also, for those of you wondering where my cannabis with dyspraxia video is, I actually recorded like the whole thing and was halfway through editing it, and then I realized that it was very heavily biased. And I personally want all of my videos to be as informative and educational as possible, so that requires being a little bit more objective. So I am going to reshoot that video probably next week and record it and upload it. If not next week, then the week after, just sometime within the next 2 weeks. It's just been hectic lately, especially with the holidays and everything. So I will get to the cannabis video, I promise. It's just not this week. So the hardest thing about having dyspraxia and being in the United States is that in the US, dyspraxia is very poorly understood, thus making it hard to even get SSI or any sort of disability income for it. And on top of that, finding work in general, especially if you have verbal dyspraxia, it makes interviews and all that other stuff really hard, as well as just finding a job to meet your needs. The other thing to remember is that while disability is important, and to some extent dyspraxia is a disability, it's also not to the extent that you're completely unable to work, although you do have some significant limitations depending on how severe your dyspraxia is. And especially with hand-eye coordination, or if you have verbal dyspraxia, something like customer service where you're behind a counter like I am now can be difficult, especially when it comes to communicating with others and also having anxiety. While the kitchen environment itself may seem like the ideal thing for somebody with dyspraxia, especially with verbal dyspraxia, the amount of care that needs to be taken when working with hot and sharp objects, especially with the lack or intensity of temperature sensitivity in some individuals, it can make it even more difficult as well. And so both of these things need to be considered when looking at a kitchen environment. Even something that's hot and ready like a gas station or a McDonald's, you'll still be around some form of oven or refrigerator or sharp knives. And especially with coordination, it's important to always be careful when using these. Working in hard lines, like say something like a back room or stock or even a warehouse, probably some of the easiest jobs you can get. And I am going to bring up something later that is also important for a shift like that may help people. And so I find that working somewhere like a warehouse or something may seem easier, but the amount of tasks and the amount of pressure that you're under to meet a specific rate may make it slightly difficult. On top of that, although you're not spending as much fine motor control working in a back office and stocking, you're using a lot of that gross motor control and the balance and making sure things are in line and even, which may also inhibit some limitations. Office jobs that require the use of a computer and less speech are probably what's ideal for someone with dyspraxia, although they're harder to get into as they usually require a lot of experience as well as a lot of schooling. And so I won't be talking as much about office jobs as, well, they're pretty hard to find. And once you've found one, you're pretty much set. Although I will talk more about office jobs in length in another video. Now, if speech is your strong point, something like a cashier position is actually pretty good and can be very rewarding. Although it does require some fine motor skill, especially when handling change and money. And if you're in a place that doesn't use automatic counting drawers, well, you're going to be counting out change. Although the majority of registers these days in the modern era tend to calculate the money and the change for you. Find a place with a change machine to work at, preferably. as this will automatically count out and distribute the change. On top of that, especially if diplomacy or politics or just talking in general is your strong suit, you'll find yourself getting a lot more customer service experience, which can help you get into more rewarding jobs that will help you with speaking and will increase your speaking skill. While on top of that, also be more rewarding to someone whose strong point is, well, speaking. Now, if you are in a small town or in a rural area and you can really only find a place or get hired by a place that does have the manual registers where you have to count everything out, the best thing to do, and I found this has helped with my sister and a close friend of mine as well, is to just pick up one of them little kid, or you can pick them up real cheap at the dollar store at a Dollar General, those little kid play money registers, and just practice with somebody. It may look silly at first, but honestly, I find that it's helped the people that I've known greatly when it comes to counting money. Now, again, I tend to work at a place that has automatic registers, and while I can't name drop the place or anything, most modern places, especially with a corporate brand name, will have some sort of technology that'll count the money for you anyway. Now, handling the money itself may cause some problems, and yes, I've dropped my fair share of coins and bills. But being in a retail scenario, the majority of people aren't going to care that you dropped $1 and picked it back up, or that you mishandled something. As long as you're counting change right, everyone should be fine. And if you get an annoying customer in retail, well, just about everyone else you work with is going to back you up. Seriously, there are numerous subreddits and Facebook groups and websites, essentially, just highlighting all the assholes that you'll meet as customers in retail, all the Karens and such. It's just how retail is. You'll get your good customers, you'll get your customers who you're close friends with, you'll get customers who are regulars, who you see every day, and you also get your asshole customers. That's just the nature of life, unfortunately. Sometimes you meet some good people, sometimes you meet some people who aren't having the best day, and, well, some people just want to watch the world burn. Working in a kitchen environment is a little different, especially if you have dyspraxia. And making food, especially when you're put on a time limit and having to meet a time schedule, can be very, very agonizing. This is something I wouldn't heavily suggest for anyone with dyspraxia, but if you do manage to get a job, take your time. Please take your time. By all means, I'm sure that a couple of customers, especially your Karens, will get annoyed and get mad that you're taking so long with their food. But you know what? Just remind them, at least they're getting their food and not your severed finger. Remember that chick with the finger in the chili? Yeah. And you know, it's not always permanent. And if you do like cooking, and there are plenty of people that do, you could get a job as a line cook at a restaurant. And while there is significant time pressure, working in an actual restaurant environment, as opposed to say something like McDonald's, even at somewhere like Panera Bread or Salad Works, where you're essentially just a lower paid line cook. And that can be greatly rewarding as well, and can give you more experience towards even working at a major restaurant or a major food establishment. I've also found that jobs at restaurants actually aren't that hard to find either. And so, if you look hard enough, especially on Indeed, you'll find something. The one thing I found hardest when working in a food establishment, especially with my past in working at Domino's and Salad Works, is remembering what all goes into a specific item. And while you may have some helpful hints and everything, you are also on time pressure. Now, it is completely understandable, especially within your first day to first week of training and getting to know everything, that you're going to forget things, or you're going to not remember how something is made. Now, what can be helpful is, say, making flashcards and treating it like it's a test or like it's an exam, and just practicing over and over and over again. There's a reason they teach you these things in school. because they can be very helpful to someone who's having trouble remembering something. And also keep in mind that nobody's going to be mad at you if you take that long, honestly, especially within your first month to week. And if you truly are passionate about what you do and you get yourself invested into it, it's going to be a lot easier to get into. It's always important that no matter how annoying or how stressful a job is, to invest as much of yourself into it as possible. And that goes with customer service as well as stock. It's just a matter of where you work, trying to put as much of yourself into it as possible, getting your money's worth, so to speak. A lot of people complain that they're always bored at work or that work is stressful and they just can't handle it anymore. But if you make your work into a passion and you get yourself truly invested into it, you'll find yourself picking up on things a lot easier and a lot faster. Now, the only negative really to stock is, well, it doesn't really require fine motor control, and even most gross motor control to some extent. It does focus very heavily on organization, which can be a problem for some people with dyspraxia. And so the key thing to remember is almost everything you work with in stock is already labeled for you. And even then, I mean, the organizational skills, unless something is completely unlabeled, which if you're doing any sort of warehouse work is pretty much unheard of, I'm sure you'll find it eventually. Now, that's the only problem with warehouse work especially, is meeting a rate or meeting a certain time period, especially in warehouses. And I've never really personally worked in a warehouse, but I have done security at a warehouse, and I've found that some warehouses are different than others. If you go to the interview, make sure you get a good idea of what you're going to be expected to do. And if you cannot meet that need, you'll find yourself becoming more stressed. And this is the same with almost all jobs, that as long as you know what your expectations are and what's listed in your contract, you can decide whether or not that's the right job for you. And at the end of the day, that's what's most important. While you're going to an interview or you're going to an orientation, yeah, it's difficult. Yeah, it sucks. And yeah, it's hard to ask questions, especially when you're nervous in that moment. But at the same time, just try to get a good idea of what's expected of you, so you can either work to meet that demand, or if that demand is just too high for you, whether at the moment or just in general, you can either work to meet that demand or find a better job that's more suited to your limitations. Now, one of the biggest things I said in the Living with Dyspraxia video was don't be afraid to get help. And that's important for almost any situation, but especially in the workplace. Even if you don't feel comfortable going to a manager, everyone makes friends at work. It's part of just being human. We are social animals. And even if you haven't started yet, I'm sure you found someone who you either like or who has similar interests or whatever. Always try to have that support system. Don't be afraid to make friends at work. And if you are having limitations or you are having problems, feel free to go to this trusted individual and say, oh, hey, am I missing something? Or is there something I'm not doing right? Or is there something I can do to improve myself? Or, oh, hey, I have this or that limitation. Do you have any tips or anything that's helped you along the way? Something or another. And so you'll find that almost anywhere you work, you're going to find somebody who will be able to help you. And it's just a matter of asking for help, which I can understand is scary and is anxiety ridden, especially if you're talking openly about having dyspraxia to this person. Although asking for help is probably the best thing you can do, and nobody's going to punish you or yell at you for it. You're not going to get fired because you have dyspraxia. At least in the United States, it's considered work discrimination. They legally cannot fire you for it. And if they have, find yourself a good-ass lawyer. And another important thing to take from this video is, yes, dyspraxia sucks. And it is pretty much like the worst thing to have when you're trying to get involved in the workplace, especially one that requires organization, fine motor control, and gross motor control. which is just about every physical job that's not an office job. And even then, with office jobs, you got typing, and again, another video. But also, it's important to remember that while you have limitations and everything, you're not completely disabled, and after enough time and enough effort, and after working through it, you will eventually catch on to what you're doing, and you will eventually get good at it. All humans do this, no matter what their limitations. It's why people who have had a limb amputated can still go on and do great things, and eventually do the same things they used to do, just minus one limb. We as humans have evolved over time, and that's just what we do as people. And you will eventually find your grip on whatever it is you want to do or whatever it is you are doing. Don't give up and don't let go. Don't forget that you are amazing just as you are, just by you being yourself, as Mr. Rogers used to say. Thanks for watching, and have a good one.